Hi everybody, welcome. Hyrox has been around for a few years now, and it's increasing in popularity year on year. And since its inception, there has been one question that has been asked more than any other question. What trainer is best for Hyrox? Now, while there is no definitive answer, and that debate rages on, Puma in the background, the long-standing sponsor of Hyrox, have been developing a range of trainers called the Puma Deviate range, and there's several iterations into that now. You cannot go to a Hyrox event these days without tripping over half a dozen people sporting these types of shoes. Now, the success of these shoes comes down to selling them at these events, a close partnership with Hyrox itself, and very targeted marketing through social media. It makes you want to own those shoes if you're into Hyrox. Now, whether or not these shoes are in fact the best shoes for Hyrox, there has never been an official shoe for Hyrox until today. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to unbox a brand new pair of Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3s. After that, I'm going to reflect a little bit on the previous version of the shoe, the Deviate Nitro 2s, and some of the problems I found with that and whether or not those problems still exist in this shoe. I'm going to take the shoes to the gym and put them through a series of Hyrox related tests before finally taking the shoes for a test run. At the end of that, I will be able to give you a nice rounded opinion of how that shoe has performed throughout those tests. So before we get the shoes out, I just want to say that I am not sponsored by Puma. I'm not against the idea. Hi Puma, but as of right now, I am not sponsored, so the video that I bring you is completely based upon my experiences of the shoe in these initial tests and my opinion of them therefore after. Right then, time to take a look at these trainers. In this box we have a brand new pair of Puma Nitro Elite 3s with Hyrox livery. Puma have released 3 trainers within this family. You've got at the bottom of that family you have the Velocities. They're intended as a training trainer, one you might wear to the gym while you're preparing for a Hyrox event, and one you might choose to partner up with one of the more advanced shoes. In the middle you've got the Deviates. These are your everyday competitive trainer. And at the top of the pile you have the Nitro Elite 3s, which boast all of the best technical advancements that they have chosen to put into a Hyrox shoe. Okay, very exciting. We've now got the shoes out of the box and here in front of me. I'm going to take a little look around them. I'm going to touch very briefly on some of the characteristics of the shoe that are important to Hyroxers. Right, the very first thing you'll notice when you get them out of the box is that they are very striking. This lime green and the white and the contrasting colours make them very impressive to look at. You'll also notice that they are mismatched. So you get one white trainer and one green trainer, and on the inside of the shoes you get the official Hyrox brand. This takes me back to what I was talking at the beginning. These are the first set of shoes that have ever been branded to Hyrox by Puma. I'm going to touch on some of the more important details, the ones that are practically important to you, the ones that are important to the event itself. The very first thing and the most important thing for me is, are they a good running shoe? Now these boast an incredible energy return, and that's made up from 2 key components. One, the foam, the nitrogen infused foam, and the power plate that runs throughout it. These are full length carbon plates to provide that extra snap in your running. Additionally, the second thing that is most important and most talked about is the grip. Everyone frets about the grip. Now, we're looking at the outsole on these shoes. The grip looks to be really quite good. Now they're not huge lugs, so my question would be, how long will these shoes last before they start slipping under some of the more heavy sled loads? So I'll be keeping an eye on that one. With regards to the third and last thing is the stability of the shoe. Now the stability of the shoe often comes from the arch, from the sort of medial dip in the midfoot here. So I will be testing that out a little bit later. And the last thing to probably touch on is the efficiency of the shoe, the weight. And that comes from the lightness of the foam and the lightness of the shoe upper, which has this ultra weave, super light mesh that goes over the top of it. And these come in at 209 grams, which is an incredibly light super shoe, and it is right up there with the very best on the market today. I'm going to take these shoes to the gym. I'm going to put them through a series of tests, basically the 8 exercise stations, to see how they handle the load, the weight, the movements, just get an initial impression of how they behave. 2 years ago, I bought the original version of these shoes, and I ran them through the same set of tests, and everything went well, as I expect the tests for these to go well. I then later took those shoes to Hyrox Birmingham and ran that event in those shoes. It wasn't until I'd finished that race that I realised that there was in fact quite a few problems that I'd not detected in the tests, and it's going to be those problems that I'm looking for in these shoes. The 4 problems, as I see it, are: 1, the stability. Now, while these are pretty decent running shoes, the stability is a bit of a problem when you use anything under weight. So the farmer's carry, certainly ones with lots of U-turns in, you very much feel that the medial side of the shoe is tremendously unsupported. It is very narrow at the midfoot, and even as a neutral pronator, you will have problems turning those corners. It almost encourages the ankles to roll in, certainly when you're underweight and that foam starts to get squished down at the weakest part of the shoe. Second is the energy return. It didn't feel to have that snap of other super shoes. The Saucony Endorphin Pro 3s, the Alpha Flies, the Vaporflies are all much better in this respect, and maybe this is because I've got used to shoes like that over time that I couldn't necessarily feel the pop in these. The grip, the outsole, has very shallow lug profile. Now, while this is okay on day one in the tests, over the course of runs and pushing sleds, it can have an effect of wearing that down. And more recently, I've felt the slip on these shoes because basically the toe where you're putting all that pressure, certainly when pushing sleds, gets worn away. Lastly, the most annoying factor about these shoes is the sock liner, the bit that sits at the bottom of your shoe under your actual foot. From day one, I noticed that these were whimsically thin and not secured to the bottom of the shoe at all. And this is kind of what you're left up with. This battered little piece of cardboard. Every single time you put your foot in or out of these shoes, they wrinkle up, and even when you're actually going along and doing work or running, you can find that they're scrunching up in the toes. It's more of an annoyance than anything. And one last thing, this is more cosmetic than anything, is that the graphic of the Puma logo, the cat here, is starting to come away from the shoe. I don't know if you can see that. It's just not very good. It's coming away like a cheap kiddie's fake tattoo thing. And it just makes the whole thing look a bit messy. I haven't done massive miles in these. I've only done one Hyrox, and they're basically my gym shoe now, which is a great shame because I had great expectations for them. Test 1, the ski erg. Now, you wouldn't think trainers had much of an impact on the ski erg, and you would be absolutely right, but for the sake of completeness, I have included this ski in the actual tests. Now, one thing you do notice is that you roll up onto your toes if you're applying quite a lot of power to the machine, and sometimes that might have a bearing of whether or not you roll too far forward or too far back. Now, these are Meta Rocker design shoes, so you do have a tendency to rock backwards and forwards on them, squishing the toes from time to time. But ultimately, there isn't a lot of impact to this particular station. Test number 2, the sled push. I loaded the sled to 152 kilos or just over for the men's open weight. Now, as you can see on my very first run, shoes pretty much straight out of the box, my feet were slipping. Now, once I got started, and got the shoes warmed up, there was no more instances of this and the shoes were fine. I tried to take short steps and long steps, slow steps and fast steps to get a variety in for the test, as well as low camera angles and side camera angles, just so you guys could see how they look when they're actually being used. Test number 3, the sled pull. I did 2 types of test, the first of which was to keep my feet perfectly still. As you can see, due to the rocker design of the shoe, it's always about finding that balance point when you're pulling on the rope. Sometimes it lifts the heels up, but as long as you keep that weight backwards, you will keep going. I also tried the hybrid style of walking it back at the same time, and that was not affected. Test 4, the burpee broad jumps. Now, there's not a lot to report on this. The most crucial factor is that when you land your jump after each repetition that you don't slip. You want that outsole to stick to the carpet. In recent Hyroxes we've seen quite slippy carpets, so it's quite important that when you do your jump and you land it, you don't slip or stumble forward. Sometimes rocking forward with these types of shoes is also possible. Test number 5, the row erg. Now, there's not a lot to consider with regards to shoes and a rowing machine, but there are 2 potential ways that you can strap yourself into the rower. Number 1, you can strap your feet in nice and tight, like a lot of people do, or number 2, you can leave them loose for easy access and easy exit. Now, I tried both ways, ensuring that the heels remain into the locking position. I tried them super loose and exaggerated the movement just to see if they wiggled free at all. Pleased to report, they stayed in the entire time, even when gunning it. Test number 6, the farmer's carry. Now, this is an important one as it tests the stabilization of the shoe. You are carrying an additional 48 kilos on top of your own body weight, traveling at speed and entering very sharp hairpin corners. That outside foot has a tendency to lean in. It's whether or not it leans in too far that it causes you an injury. It's worth keeping an eye on. 7, the lunges. Now, this is probably the most important station with regards to stabilization. You are loaded up with 20 or 30 kilos on top of your own body weight, and you're planting a lot of that weight into the forefoot with every repetition. What you generally find is that weight transfers down the medial side, the inside of the leg, over the arch, which is not terribly well supported. It has a tendency to make the shoe lean inwards, and it can cause problems. Now, it's whether or not you can compensate for that on race day, as it's only one station. Test number 8, the wall balls. Now, your trainers do not have a huge amount to do during the wall balls. However, you are now wearing super shoes, and as super shoes generally have quite a high heel stack, it's important to realise that you might have this tendency to roll forward with each repetition. It's just about sitting that little bit further back, maybe separating your legs a little bit so you can actually do it without falling forward at all. Test number 9, the curved treadmill. Now, I did this test both at the very start of my session and at the end. I start off with a relatively brisk jog and increase the pace all the way up to sprinting, which was about 2 minutes per kilometre pace. The shoes themselves provided fantastic energy return, and this is in part to the Meta Rocker design, which allowed me to roll over each stride, as well as the foam and carbon plate combination which exists underneath, and the shoes weighing only 209 grams makes the running efficiency really good. I was really pleasantly surprised about how these shoes felt on my feet, considering I just got them out of the box just an hour before. Not a lot to report really, all good on this front. Okay, that is the gym test done. All 8 Hyrox sessions and running tested. Okay, part 2 to testing is to take the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3s out for a real world run. So they are going to be accompanying me around a 5k speed work around the park here. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so that is the run component of this test done. Fantastic. In terms of running shoes, these are great. Great energy return, comfortable, no rubbing of any kind. 5k sprint in its stride, done. Okay, conclusion time. What do I think of the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3s? Well, I'm going to start at the very beginning. When I first put this shoe onto my foot, the very first thing I thought is that this shoe feels very solid. That in part comes from the new rigid heel counter here. On the previous version of the shoe, it was soft or broke down over time, and it made for putting your foot in and out of the shoe just really frustrating. Inside the shoe, the sock liner, the thing that bugged me before with it coming out and being very thin, they've now glued it down and it's spongy, which adds an extra layer of comfort inside the shoe. And the toe box is noticeably wider than the previous shoe as well. I wore a particularly thin pair of running socks yesterday during the tests, and I noticed that I had an abundance of space in here. That's very reassuring should I want to wear slightly thicker socks, or if you've got a slightly wider foot, there isn't a problem with this shoe. So I took this shoe to the gym and put it through a series of Hyrox related tests. The very first thing I did when I got there was jump onto one of the curved treadmills and wound it up to a semi-sprint pace, around 2 minutes per kilometre. At that pace, I recognised straight away that the shoe was providing excellent energy return. And that comes from a variety of factors on the shoe: the nitro foam, the power plate, the Meta Rocker design, and the fact that the shoe only weighs 209 grams provides an excellent running experience. So what are the downsides to the shoe? What are the problems? What did I encounter? Now, some of these problems stem from the previous version, are still present in this, albeit slightly reduced. Stability is always going to be a problem with this type of shoe, and I'll explain why. Stacked foam super shoes are soft underneath, right? Inevitably, when you add additional weight onto one foot, they are going to collapse. And when I say collapse, I mean squash on the weakest part of the shoe. With a shoe that's got a very narrow waisted geometry, like the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3s, like here, they are inevitably going to squash at the weakest part, and that is inside. When you are lunging, the medial side takes the majority of the weight, so inevitably they lean inwards, adding this extra overpronation sensation. So they always feel like they're squashing on the inside. This is true when carrying the farmer's kettlebells around, certainly when you are doing U-turns like that, certainly the outside foot leans in. With regards to the sled push, I have a couple of notes on this. When I very first put the shoe on and the very first sled I pushed, I noticed that I was getting a little bit of pain here at the bottom of this new rigid heel counter. I was also getting some uncomfortableness from the sort of big toe area. Now, I can't tell if both of these things are simply because the shoe is new out of the box, and that was one of the very first tests I did, and the fact I need to allow it a little bit of time for me to break these shoes in like I would any other running shoe. So I'll keep an eye on that. One thing I did notice, the first couple of pushes on the sled, my feet were slipping. It was only the open weight, but my feet were slipping. And I think that comes down to the fact that these are running shoes first, Hyrox shoes second. And that is most appropriately demonstrated by the fact that the lug profile on the outsole is very shallow, only like a couple of millimeters. So you are not getting huge amounts of grip. That's the most amount of grip this shoe will ever have. Over time, this will start to reduce down due to wear and tear. It's not going to take long for 2 millimeters to wear out. So it adds extra questions about durability and longevity of the shoe. Okay, so as a final thought about these shoes, these are fantastic running shoes. I would wear these for competitive running, no problem. They provide an excellent running experience. Now, if I was to use these for running and for Hyrox, I feel that they would wear out extraordinarily quickly. The durability of the outsole, the very shallow grip profile here, the lug profile, I think that it would end the shoe prematurely if I was to try to use this shoe for both. So I think it lends itself to being a event day shoe, a race day shoe. If you were to buy a second pair of shoes to accompany it, it would make a nice duo. If you bought the Velocities, for example, and you could have both pairs, use those for training, use these for racing, it would provide an excellent partnership. Right. that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please give the channel a subscribe on your way out, and I'll see you soon. Mart out.